Finally, Spider-Man Brand New Day is in theaters, and to say the least, it has been a long time coming. Between the secrecy maintained right up to the world premiere red carpet and extremely aggressive marketing, never has a Marvel movie managed to keep us so much in the dark while showing us so much footage. Years after its announcement, the film that couldn't decide whether it was set before or after Doomsday, whether to go multiverse or stay street level, simply chose to be a pure Spider-Man movie, while fully connecting to the rest of the MCU. Yes, there's Hulk, yes, there's the Punisher, but this Peter, more mature than ever, never once tried to recycle old formulas. He's not perfect, but he introduces us to a whole new Peter, and above all, a whole new Spider-Man, maybe the most comics-inspired version we've ever had. And as a fan, that's absolutely all I was asking for. But I also received a lot of messages from you saying you're disappointed. That Marvel tried to fully integrate Spider-Man into the rest of the MCU without ever really going all the way, that the ending would be disappointing. As for me, I find the movie pretty balanced. It introduces many upcoming elements without explaining everything. That's why in this video, we're going to go over all the details, plots, and developments you might have missed, and especially try to see what's planned next for all these characters and the MCU. Above all, we'll explain this sometimes strange ending possibly changed last minute and the mysterious post-credit scene. So, I'm warning you, my friends, we're entering the spoiler zone, the danger zone. You're with Kevin Bookhart, your favorite theorist's favorite theorist. Intro, it's Kevin Bookhart. A real Spider-Man in the MCU. On the channel, this month of July has been very special. We covered San Diego Comic-Con and I also talked to you a lot about Spider-Man. It was an opportunity for me to theorize, but above all to analyze the entire story of this Spidey in the MCU. Tom Holland and his Peter have always fluctuated between being very good and, in my view, an adaptation that misunderstood the character. A very strong introduction in Civil War to mixed solo outings up to the intense emotion of Infinity War and Endgame, especially in his relationship with Tony Stark. But Brand New Day gives everything a whole new start across the board right from the introduction. No more stock technology, Peter has used all his experience to create his own laboratory, a 3D printer that makes his costumes and gadgets for him. A brand new AI named Evie and a high-tech system to identify crimes faster than the police themselves. By the way, the movie doesn't bother explaining how he made all of this. It starts off at full speed with Peter fighting bandits and handing them over to the police. Then there's a series of villains, all already revealed in the trailer. Right away, there's Scorpion, who apparently escaped from prison. Tombstone makes his only appearance, but as we already knew, there's also Boomerang, Tarantula, and Ramrod. Not to mention Man Freddy, also known as Silverman and Agent John DeWolf. Peter's only ally at the beginning of this movie, who will become important in the next films, but we'll talk about that at the end. A super dynamic montage that reminds us of the one from the Fantastic Four and acts as a new origin story. We're no longer with the teenage Peter who constantly needs a mentor. Now, Spider-Man is a hero, more than just some guy in New York fighting crime in the streets of Manhattan. And I'll tell you, that's probably both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. Let me explain. I think we've never had a Spider-Man in the MCU who was so comics accurate. Clearly, this introduction makes us feel like we're opening a comic book and having a blast, not to mention the direction straight out of the Insomniac video game with its breathtaking swinging and combat sequences. But the movie seems so eager to get started that it skips over everything else. Because let me remind you, the events of No Way Home and Strange's spell made him completely disappear. By the way, many of you don't necessarily understand how this spell works. And that's normal. The first version shown in theaters was pretty vague about its consequences. That's why, a few weeks later, Sony released an extended version that shows us that Peter is not only erased from memory, but also from every photo and every official record. Peter Parker simply doesn't exist anymore and never existed, to the point where he doesn't even have any papers. But as a result, we forget that for us, he still exists. Yet the movie completely skips over the main point. How does Peter survive? He does have an apartment, admittedly a shabby one, but he also uses the basement of a building for his high-tech bachelor pad, with equipment and high-end accessories. Okay, I get it, it's supposed to be a revolution, but still, how does he pay for all that? Throughout the whole movie, he never mentioned a side job or a possible career as a photographer. Worse, he doesn't seem to have studied anywhere. He's just a genius with resources. And I think that's one of the weak points of the movie, because even Empire State University just seems to be the place where Professor Banner teaches. Peter doesn't know where the library is and just seems to have bought an ESU sweater. Yes, for the past 4 years, he's only been Spider-Man. Not to mention the same internet memes about him and Mephisto are still online, but there's no mention of James Jonah Jameson.
Spider-Man, a psychopath? Let me tell you something, kid. You're not a hero.
Even though he should be front and center, it's clear that Spider-Man's actions cause a lot of damage, even if it's just to stop criminals. It's a small detail, but it definitely caught my attention. Anyway, 4 or 5 years where Peter didn't meet anyone, had no friends, and fought crime behind the mask until the day he runs into Ned again. In addition to the Jackal Beer Easter egg we've discussed before, Peter also included some product placement for his non-alcoholic beer, Biero. Yes, Tom went through some tough times with alcohol and is now completely sober. That's why he created his own brand of non-alcoholic beer. Just a little fun fact. He decides to follow Ned to his own housewarming party and runs into MJ again. Two characters who have a history with Spider-Man who saved them many times in their youth, but none with Peter Parker. We also see that Ned tries everything to find out who Spider-Man really is, even going so far as to suspect Flash and their high school teacher. We later learn that the spell left a real hole in their memory, and Ned and MJ are geniuses too. They studied at MIT, which makes this mystery even more disturbing for them. Peter introduces himself as Maynard, a rather rare first name he blurts out instinctively. The first name that likely comes to mind is May, the most important person in his life, and he builds from there. By the way, MJ picks up on it by adding Maynard, which is probably the mix that characterizes Peter the most. But it's also here that we see MJ has a new little theme. That's not how we imagine life. A shot lasting just 3 seconds in the movie is enough to trigger Peter's transformation. These 4 years of forgetting himself didn't just isolate him. They messed up his DNA and accelerated his mutation. The spider is taking over and making him lose all control. We'll come back to this in detail because it changes a lot for the rest of the movie. But before that, let's go back a bit. At the very beginning of the movie, the montage about Spidey's actions leads us to the famous tank attack scene and to one of the best swinging scenes across all the Spider-Man films. A scene that was revealed at Comic-Con during Michael Giacchino's panel, which I was lucky enough to attend. It's a scene that was among the very first ones shot in Glasgow. And that's where the biggest difference with Jon Watts' previous films comes into play. Just like he did with the bus scene in Shang-Chi, Destin Daniel Cretton favored shooting on location for most of the action scenes, which makes it one of the most beautiful Marvel films in recent years. No more sloppy effects or blue screens. Every swing feels real. In this scene, we finally grasp Peter's role in New York over the past few years. Yes, Spider-Man didn't appear in either Daredevil, Born Again, or Thunderbolts, 2 projects that take place right in New York. Yet, they do seem to share some history with Frank Castle, simply explained by the fact that Spidey saved him from certain death in Staten Island. Since then, the two have crossed paths regularly during joint missions in New York, and their chemistry is simply extraordinary, and that's no coincidence. Tom Holland and John Bernthal are very good friends in real life. They met on the set of the movie The Last Crusade and helped each other with their auditions for Spider-Man and the Punisher. And here, their friendship really shines through on screen in this movie. But we'll talk more about the Punisher a little later. Because there's another cameo we need to talk about. Yelena's. Yes, Yelena is now an established member of the New Avengers. And let me remind you that the movie actually takes place between Thunderbolts and Doomsday in 2028, alright? Aside from a little joke where her office is in a public bath, reminding us of her Russian origins, she comes to establish a hierarchy among the heroes. The New Avengers handle the big cases, like the Avengers did before, but in a more official way, like a government organization. Peter handles the petty crimes, the street criminals. Meanwhile, Daredevil was openly at war with the mayor of New York. Peter shows here that he follows the rules, works with the police and the DUD Daredevil, and therefore has no personal interest in getting involved in Daredevil's war. That's why he doesn't appear in any other New York project. He has his own jurisdiction, that of the police throughout Manhattan. While Daredevil, on the other hand, remains confined to Hell's Kitchen facing the Kingpin's task force. But this bath scene also highlights an important detail. Peter remains Spider-Man in all circumstances. Even in the bath, he keeps his mask on, even when having tea with the Punisher. He only takes it off with MJ, the only one who brings him back to Peter. Right after that, he leaves the famous letter, leading to the heartbreaking scene where MJ says she doesn't love him. The return of Ned and MJ to New York changed everything. A Spidey without a mentor. While Jon Watts' trilogy dealt with the hero's adolescence, Brand New Day seems to fully embrace the evolution toward a more mature story. I've often told you, for a long time I blamed Watts and the MCU for being afraid to use Spider-Man's lore, especially with Mary Jane turned into Michelle Jones and Mo being tormented. An entourage that kept everyone stuck in childhood. But I have to say, one of the great successes of this film lies in the complete overhaul of the characters and its integration into a mature MCU. Peter is now in full control of his Spidey identity. No street-level threat is really a match for his mastery. All the characters around him support his upcoming transformation. Previously, Peter was surrounded by mentors like Stark, Fury, and Strange, who helped him grow from film to film. Now, it's Peter who has a real impact on the rest of the MCU. These characters aren't just added as simple cameos by chance. Each one has a role, a purpose. And all of them represent the idea of evolving identity. The Punisher shows what isolation and anger can do to a man. Banner shows the dangers of repressing an inner monster. And Jean shows what it means to lose yourself. Because Jean is the most interesting character in this film, I have to admit my mistake. I was among the first to say Sadie Sink would play Jean Grey, even when others called me crazy. But after so many theories, I couldn't believe Marvel would make her the film's main villain. Then came the idea of a second telepath, but no, Jean Grey, the first real X-Men mutant in the MCU, is indeed the only telepath in the film. Well, in theory, because she gets control of her power from her sister, Sarah Grey, who is the reason behind Jean's actions. Since then, Jean, searching for her sister, only lives through the eyes and memories of those she possesses. A bit like Peter only lives through the eyes of Spidey. And I have to say, I really liked Peter's impact on these characters, starting with Frank. For once, he's not just about confrontation and fighting anymore. He opens up and befriends Peter, despite their differences throughout. But Peter will teach him compassion, right up to that great final scene in the hospital, where the chemistry is perfect. Peter really has an impact on him. By the way, a little Easter egg. The Punisher's stick is called the Golden Girl, which is a reference to his first meeting with Spider-Man in the comic Spectacular Spider-Man number 141. As for Hulk, it's a bit different because Jean, while controlling Banner, broke the mental block that kept Hulk locked away. And his transformation doesn't happen when she has control, but rather when Banner comes back. No Banner. For me, no. A very interesting element since it shows us that Jean has a real impact on what she controls. She doesn't bother with anyone's traumas. She uses the body and mind without restriction. And it could have a real impact on what's to come, especially in Secret Wars. But Banner doesn't stop there. Here, he's the one who helps Peter find a way to control his own mutation by drawing inspiration from technology capable of controlling gamma mutation, a technology that already exists and is used to control the mutations of She-Hulk and Abomination. But Peter manages to make it work for any type of mutation, yet another little detail that I think I'm the only one who predicted. The idea that Peter simply gave Mads Gear and the Dio God here the technology to suppress the powers of mutants in the future. Theory aside, this movie not only offers a new perspective, but it probably gives us the best action scenes for all of its characters. Friends, the real Hulk, powerful, savage, and back. This Hulk versus Punisher punker fight, Spidey, is simply exceptional. Well, even though Sony thought it was a good idea to release it in full on the internet before the movie, which is totally lame, a fight that ends with Peter managing to calm Hulk down. Well, the scene is strange, but it seems like Hulk remembers who Peter is. How? Why? No idea. But Banner takes back control and lets himself fall. The movie tells us that he also ends up in the damage control prison. But I think the best development in this movie compared to the home saga is simply MJ. So I've never been a fan of this character, as you know, but Zendaya comes back with a whole new approach. She's also much more mature and brings something much more interesting to the movie. Just like Gamora and Star-Lord, she doesn't just come back in I remember mode, and my favorite scene in the movie is probably the one where Jean possesses her to make Peter suffer. The two of them give us an acting lesson, and clearly no one saw it coming, yet it was right there in front of us. MJ doesn't say anything while swinging, whereas the real MJ actually hates it.
You okay?
Never doing that again. I'm never doing that.
This scene is followed by another reference to The Amazing Spider-Man 2 where MJ falls from the roof and Peter catches her. Repeating the same trick is odd, but Destin Daniel Cretton clearly wanted to add more tributes to past Spideys. This scene and the one where he learns to use his new web do that. Plus he's basically Peter 2 here.
Okay, Peter 2 has organic webs too. He's cool, you're cool.
Or also, the fact that the damage control prison is located on Roosevelt Island, the place of the final scene of the very first Spider-Man. Well, all this just for in the end, no, Peter doesn't get back together with the love of his life. And as for the end, he decides not to be alone anymore. He goes back to see Ned and not MJ. Ned still has his Chewbacca figurine, is watching The Empire Strikes Back, referencing Peter's debut in Civil War. Hey guys!
Hey guys, have you seen this really old movie, The Empire Strikes Back?
He manages to remember their handshake. And that's one of the mysteries of the movie that I think is pretty well done. I've told you many times the movie doesn't explain everything to us. I think that's one of the things that made some of you feel like something was unfinished, because Karine explains to Peter that there's absolutely nothing left of him in MJ's memory, but when Spidey starts playing Lego with Ned, he instantly reconnects with him. Their friendship doesn't need memories. And that handshake is anchored in Ned's muscle memory. He, who has been trying for years to figure out Spider-Man's identity, which he's convinced he knows, connects all the dots at that very moment. MJ let Peter's name slip when Spider-Man leaves, and Peter introduces himself at the end of the movie with that handshake. Ned just has to make the connection. Peter is no longer alone now. He has Ned, Jean, and MJ. Even though with her, it's a bit different. Love has to be built. It's not innate, but now she knows, and that's why at the end of the movie, she finds herself where it all began, on the roof of Minton High. We see her touching the necklace that Peter gave her in Far From Home, the one she keeps wearing without knowing why. I know that many people interpret this as if her memories have come back. For me, it's much simpler. MJ just found out she once had a relationship with Spider-Man, one that was taken from her, even if she doesn't remember or feel anything for him now. Today, it's a rather disturbing revelation that will stick with her going forward. She probably won't be Peter's love interest for a while, but she'll still be there, not far away, and that's for the best. On one hand, it gives Peter the chance to flirt with others, but also to see MJ really grow on her own. Before, don't worry, he finds her again by the end. Especially since Marvel has given us some little hints, like Peter's famous blonde neighbor who many think is Gwen, but personally I just see her as a reference to the neighbor from Raimi's movies. Or even MJ's boyfriend, who some already think is Harry Osborn, especially because MJ said she turned down a job at a soulless company. She studied biochemistry and aerospace, a company that could be Oscorp. And after all, why not? They still went and got an actor who's already part of the Disney galaxy, since he appears in the Ahsoka series. Anyway, their story is far from over, but the story of the mutants begins here, the God here and the mutations. Despite the many characters, the main theme of the movie remains Peter's mutation. Well, main? Let's just say that the many trailers and TV spots really misled us because they heavily emphasized this mutation, the fight with Hulk, and the Hand. As for the ending, these elements are parts of the plot, though not the main focus. By the way, let's talk about the Hand. We made it one of the major elements in our theories, when in fact it's simply a squad of the local god. Let me remind you that the entire elite of the Hand was destroyed during the events of Defenders in 2018, which was 10 years earlier. We had 6 or 7 ninjas roaming New York, and now they're working for the government. So the question is if they're being manipulated because of experiments on Sarah Gray, and therefore under mind control, like Jean does at the end. Or if, simply, Destin Daniel Cretton just wanted to have some fun, because honestly, it doesn't hint at the return of the Hand or anything like that. Actually, they're just there and on every single poster. In short, the mutation. Peter must struggle against his evolving powers, which take over during intense stress and are beyond his control. A mutation that enhances his reflexes, his strength, his endurance, and gives him organic webs. A mutation that no longer allows him to detect Jean through his spider sense. Which makes no sense since it actually enhances his spider sense to the extreme. So, it's Leia who will take on this role, and honestly I didn't understand that move at all. It's an element that, as I mentioned, ends up being secondary in the story. At no point does she actually put Peter's fate in real danger, and in the end, she has no impact on the ending, except for unleashing that power against the Hand, and on that point I understand your frustration, guys. Finally, the cocoon scene is completely rushed. He sees MJ with a boyfriend, breaks down, and wakes up in a cocoon. Whereas in the comics, in the other run, Peter gradually loses control of his powers and knows he's doomed. He ends up dying, transformed into a different spider through that famous cocoon. He becomes the other. And here, this mutation is only there to set up the next part of the MCU. First, by giving Peter the tools to survive in Avengers Secret Wars, because there he won't have all his gadgets. He'll need his organic webs, and he'll also use them to create mutation inhibitors. That alone creates a whole lineage of tech. Inspired once again by Banner's technology, of course, but also by Octopus. That's the same thing we see in Deadpool 2 with the inhibitor collar, the one used to enslave mutants in the apocalyptic future of Days of Future Past. A technology that would seem to already exist since Wanda has a collar when she's arrested in the raft. But well, it's not like we're short on inconsistencies. Anyway. The genealogy is long, but let's stick to the essentials. Peter is the one who originally created this inhibitor, and now it's the DODC who controls it. Or at the very least Mads Gear, the real villain of this whole story. In Brand New Day, Mads Gear is the director of the DODC. In my guide, I've already given you the full history of this organization created by Stark to repair the damage caused by the Avengers, which, after his death, became a government agency that hunts down illegal superhumans. Well, over time, this agency grew more extreme, imprisoning almost anyone they wanted without a real trial, as shown in the Wonder Man series with Trevor Slattery. And now, we see that not only do they use Stark's technologies like drones, Ross's technologies like sonic cannons, or even supervillains' tech like shockers. But under Mesger's leadership, they also conduct illegal experiments on their prisoners, a bit like Valentina Allegra de Fontaine with her Noexe. By the way, all of this could very well be connected, and that's what leads us to Jean Grey. Her design is absolutely wonderful in the role of the MCU's first X-Men member. Once again, what a casting choice. For years, we've been asking how mutants would be introduced. So far, 2 characters had been confirmed as mutants, Namor, the very first, and Kamala Khan. Now, it's official. Mutants are indeed present in the MCU. They don't come from another dimension or anything like that. No, they've been here a long time, since Jean and her sister Sarah have a different origin story than anything we've seen on the big screen. Here, there's no fatal car accident that led Jean to be taken in by Charles Xavier. Jean and her sister were rejected by their mother when they were both very young. Now they survive on their own by using their powers, and the God here, he really doesn't like that at all. That's why they kidnap Sarah and conduct experiments to exploit her powers until her death. And I think the twist around the VMAX is really interesting. Yes, Matt Gurn really had no idea what the VMAX was, since it's actually the last thing Sarah saw before she took her final breath, sending one last telepathic message to her sister. Yes, VMAX is actually the peeled-off logo from the Ventile Max air conditioner. Jean is after the local god and is ready to do anything to find her sister, even if it means putting many lives in danger. And even though I totally understand why she's not happy, this is something that really bothers me about the MCU lately. The idea is to make these heroes into morally grey characters who get away with everything without any consequences. Just take a look. The Punisher is able to move around freely after going after Fisk's task force and after causing a massacre in New York in his special by killing 100 guys in the street. Since he gets away with it after literally crushing his opponents and kidnapping dozens of innocent people. And Jean starts her story as a villain without any scruples, destroying the lives of many people, including Banner, and traumatizing half of New York. Awesome. And I'm already afraid of Wanda coming back as if nothing happened. And maybe that's this movie's biggest limitation. It's certainly a very good Spider-Man movie, but by trying to connect everything, it runs into the limits of a shared universe, which is already very complex, but also has to start new arcs, especially the one with the mutants. Because when you take a step back, all of this is still a real mess. Anyway, Jean is captured and Mads Gear resumes his experiments. Except Jean is much more powerful than her sister. And just like Wade Wilson, the trauma pushes Jean to evolve, to develop new powers. She, who was able to control minds within 10 meters, is now able to extend her power over a huge radius, but also capable of explosive telekinesis, the ability to move objects with her mind, and in this case, to freeze absolutely everyone. I actually think that's what she's using and not telepathy, since we see that when she took control of someone, the possessed didn't remember anything, but here, MG seems aware. She's terrified, she's crying. That's also why Peter manages to fight back thanks to his new power. And once again, the only way for Peter to reach her is through the power of friendship. But wait! Here, I'm not criticizing. I actually think it's pretty well done. Peter lets Jean access his memories. Those of Aunt May, who explains to her that having powers doesn't make her a monster, that she can still have a life and that people will love her for who she is. And I admit I love the use of Aunt May as the moral compass for this Peter and now for Jean. The two of them understand each other, they're no longer alone. Peter, now fully in control of his spider sense again, takes the Punisher's bullet for her. And Frank, like Jean, will do everything they can to make sure he survives this. A sacrifice that teaches compassion to both of them. A real act of heroism. Yeah, well, this ending is still kind of strange. I don't think things were meant to happen like this. The ending explained. As I said before, this movie doesn't explain everything, which can be confusing since we're not used to that. Ben Affleck explained it in an interview with The Rise of Doom Scrolling. Now, you have to re-explain what's happening every 15 minutes so the viewer doesn't get lost. Yes, it's sad, but the cinema of the past left room for interpretation. And that's, I think, what the ending of Brand New Day does, even though you'll see that I think this was absolutely not the originally intended ending. After the Punisher's bullet, he takes him to the emergency room with, of course, a little shot taken from the panel of the Civil War comic. Well, except that in Civil War, he's not the one who shot him. Jean uses her powers from a distance to keep him alive. Basically, she stops the blood from flowing and makes sure no one sees his face, but Frank stays by his side and now shares his secret. The scene is really touching and really feels like Spider-Man. Only this character could reach an anti-hero like the Punisher. Peter finally manages to sneak out thanks to Frank, who acts silly with Peter's mask. It's at this moment that he fully reconnects with Peter Parker. He now understands that he can be both and goes to find Ned. The Punisher has thus completed his transition from a true bloody vigilante to an anti-hero capable of fitting into any MCU story. He saw in Peter that now he too could be good. As for Jean, we see her leaving New York on a bus in what looks like upstate New York, where Charles Xavier's school is located. In the comics, Jean is Charles Xavier's very first student, and his school is above all a refuge. Just like in the movie, Jean joins Charles after her sister's death, and the world's greatest telepath gradually trains her to master her abilities. They use their powers together to find other mutants who have been hiding. The idea of forming an X-Men team only comes later when Magneto attacks humans. Charles then decides that a team needs to be created to show the world that mutants are on their side. So there's a good chance that Brand New Day will be the very first chapter of the X-Men, and that after Secret Wars, they won't just magically appear. By the way, on many occasions, the film emphasizes his sister's hair tie, a yellow and green elastic that has exactly the colors of Jean's future costume. And if Jean was able to escape so easily, it's because, apart from Peter, Frank, Matt Gear, and the DODC, no one knows that she's behind these numerous attacks. And the problem is that what Damage Control was doing isn't exactly legal, so it's hard for them to launch an investigation and issue an actual wanted bulletin. Which doesn't mean they won't go after her. Because I've been telling you for several months now, I really think the Department of Damage Control will be the main anti-mutant force in the future. Jean has proven the danger posed by these individuals whose powers are innate, sometimes uncontrolled, and by this evolution of humanity. And the next director of this department could very well be Pierre K. Mesger, and maybe even characters like Henry Peter Gierich, Bolivar Trask, or even William Stryker. Well, I say Pierre K. Mesger, but let's not count him out so quickly, because if Marvel chose Tremel Tillman to play this character, it's not just for the few minutes he has on screen in this film. In the comics, Mesger leads the anti-mutant militia, and given the trauma that Jean put him through, there's a good chance he'll become more extreme, like Fisk did after his experience with Echo, but in a less conventional way with a violent anti-mutant guerrilla movement. Finally, let's talk about the post-credits scene, which I know probably didn't please you much. We see the famous spider tracker developed by Ned. As a reminder, Ned developed a community app that allows anyone to report a Spider-Man sighting in New York. It's neither a GPS nor a real tracker. You can actually see this when Spidey arrives at his place. It's his neighbors who reported him, since the tracker shows him in his neighborhood, not directly at his home. In short, this scene shows us that there is no longer any trace of the hero anywhere in New York. The app zooms out and centers on the area where a signal is detected. And since it's a community-based tracking, it means that someone must have reported him with their phone. With, for example, the Saley Interstellar Space Plan. Yeah, it's silly, but well. And I think it's simply Peter himself who reported his own location. After all, who else? The idea is simply to let Ned know that he's no longer on Earth, but that he's okay. The movie ends with the message Spider-Man will return. That's all fine, but what does it mean? We were originally told the movie would lead straight to Doomsday. And in this case, it didn't happen. Sure, we can think that if Peter is in space, it's because he joined Reed's crew, but the ending says he'll return. Unlike the others, who are confirmed for Doomsday, Peter is unlikely to appear, except possibly at the end or in a post-credits scene, since Tom Holland and his storyline will play a major role in the next movie, Secret Wars, but not necessarily Doomsday. So, we can imagine that somehow, Peter ends up on the famous raft that allows Reed to survive the end of the multiverse and wash up on Battleworld. In the comics, Doctor Doom manages to obtain extraordinary powers to destroy the multiverse or save it, depending on the point of view, and create a Battleworld where he is the divine ruler. A world made up of the remnants of the entire multiverse where no one except Strange and Molecule Man remembers the world from before. Well, not exactly, since years after its creation, 2 lifeboats are found, from which the heroes who survived all of this emerge. They remember everything and start a rebellion against Doom. And rumors mention Spider-Man and Jean as essential elements of this story, with Jean probably playing a key role in helping the heroes remember, a bit like Layla Miller does in the House of M comic. And Peter in all this? Well, once again, this ending is not clear at all. And if you want my opinion, it was changed at the very last moment. In recent weeks, we've been hearing that the film's ending was divisive. But here, apart from the fact that it's strange and the post-credit scene seems improvised, nothing is really divisive. That's why I think this whole ending after the Punisher's shootout was hastily reworked. And what makes me say that is the testimony of Rosario Dawson, who tells us that her character, Claire Temple, was completely removed at the last second. Claire Temple is the night nurse, the one who treats the street-level superheroes of New York, and of course, when Spider-Man gets shot, you don't take him to a public hospital, but to Claire. By the way, exactly like in the other, Peter should have died in that scene, and the ending was completely different. Zendaya hinted at this throughout the promotion. She wore black the whole time, except in China, where she wore white. White is actually the color of mourning in China. I'm telling you, he should have died. And anyway, everything sounds off here. From the ugly scene where Frank enters the hospital to the room scene that was hastily shot in a studio. Yes, Peter was meant to die, be buried, and the post-credits scene likely would have shown the symbiote reviving him. And I think the studio was afraid of upsetting the fans, or at least those who don't know the comics, because between us, Peter Parker's story in Secret Wars will definitely involve the black suit, the symbiote suit. The Russos have always said their favorite comic is the 1984 Secret Wars, where this suit first appeared on that legendary cover. So I think Peter was originally supposed to get it in the first ending, and that in the end he'll only get it in the Avengers movie in 2027. This suit could be key in the future, especially in a possible Spider-Man 5, since Jean DeWolf's introduction and her significance in this movie are intentional. In a storyline I mentioned in a previous video, Jean DeWolf is murdered, which makes Peter lose it, and he goes after her killers with unspeakable violence while wearing the black suit. Meanwhile, reporter Eddie Brock publishes an interview with Emil Gregg, who falsely claims to be the Sin Eater killer. An interview that will make him a star in the press, except that Spider-Man and the two Daredevils will catch the real culprit and destroy Eddie's career. Months later, in a church, Peter gets rid of the symbiote suit that made him so aggressive. A church where Eddie prays for Spider-Man's death, a bit like in Raimi's Spider-Man 3. A suit that will bond with the journalist, creating Venom. Yeah, folks, Venom is probably on the way and will be one of the villains in this new trilogy. As I was saying, there's more to analyze than you think. Let's wrap up together. Is this the best Spider-Man movie? Brand New Day manages to give us probably one of the best Spider-Man movies in the MCU, at least as a solo film, because I really like his introduction in Civil War. He also gives all the characters nuanced writing and some of the most memorable scenes in the MCU. But it has to be said, that's also its weakness. He gets lost trying to tie everything together. Sure, Spider-Man remains central, but you can clearly feel the huge MCU checklist and the reshoots that create a lot of inconsistencies. Destin Daniel Cretton admitted he had a solid 3-hour film. However, the final version is 2 hours and 25 minutes. So, it's probably a blessing in disguise, but you can clearly feel that these missing 35 minutes are what hurt this film the most. The proof is in this somewhat lackluster ending. However, it delivers on its promise to provide a new origin story for both this mature Spider-Man and the MCU's next phase. With Thunderbolts, The Fantastic Four, Born Again Season 2, and Wonder Man, you can feel Marvel searching for itself, but refining its style with each project. And clearly, we've come a very, very long way. Both in terms of the story and the direction, because my god, it's beautiful. It hasn't looked this good in years. Destin Daniel Cretton's direction is polished and dynamic, and the cinematography is stunning. They favored practical effects over digital ones. And even when everything is digital, like the fight against Hulk, it still looks good and you buy it. So, to answer the question, yes, I think we can say with this movie, Tom is clearly entering the competition to be the best Spider-Man on screen. If you haven't seen my video on the subject, check it out. It's great. The movie's biggest weakness isn't the film itself, but its marketing campaign. In the end, what's the point of hiding Jean Grey? Such a big secret that fueled dozens of theories, only to be revealed in an insignificant way. Without any twist, the name is just dropped. Even the reveal of Ryan Reynolds and his Grey Jeans costume at Comic-Con had more impact. And what about those thousands of trailers that revealed absolutely everything and made the audience hope there were always more surprises to come? The movie remains well balanced despite having many storylines and characters. Sony simply sabotaged itself out of fear of not having enough hype, even though the first two trailers were more than enough. The first one got over 1 billion views in 24 hours. I mean, I don't know if people realize that. So why did they show 75% of the movie in useless TV spots? In the end, some fans leave disappointed. You want more without really knowing what. Just more surprises, more scenes they didn't already know about, and if you ask me, it's a huge waste. Even though for now, I still have a very positive opinion about it. I'll need a few more viewings to form a solid opinion. This analysis was done right after watching, but I think I've covered everything. In the meantime, I'll leave you with this video that tries to define who really is the best Spider-Man on the big screen. Don't forget to stay curious, that's the secret to being happy.